exposing that J-dub world. Exjw Smurf girl.
Hey everybody, how's it going? So I am so excited to share this information with you. Oh my goodness. I call it the legend of Watchtower and the beardless Jesus. It's not only the reason of why brothers have to shave if they want to have any sort of privileges at the hall, but it caused Watchtower to illustrate Jesus for 36 years as beardless. It started from something so minimal and petty and just exploded into this big giant deal. Just another thing to try and prove what they were saying was true, but in reality, oh my goodness. And that's what I'm going to show you and connect some dots that I hope that it shocks a lot of people awake. I have two questions from readers that you can show them side by side. It's like, how in the world? Because they're arguing two opposite points and they're using the same identical evidence to try and do so. Because from 1932 to 1968, 36 years, Watchtower illustrated Jesus as beardless. But they didn't just illustrate him as beardless, they had all this so-called evidence as to why they were doing so. Witnesses were expected to defend it. So how it even started, thanks to this anointed brother at our hall. He was an ex-Bethelite, and then he moves into our congregation. And he would share things, and he didn't even realize what he was saying. It ended up causing attendance at the hall to be down to only 40% because so many people were stumbled. It wasn't even funny. But this all happened in the first place. It was 1980. 5 years after 1975, so it was all still fresh on everybody's mind. And there were a bunch of us families that had bought a bunch of camping equipment for preparation for 1975. So to put that camping equipment to good use, about 6 or 7 of the families decided to travel and have a car camping trip, and we traveled all the way through South Dakota to go and see Mount Rushmore. And we had convinced all of the brothers to grow out their beards because we were going to be gone for like 2 weeks. And it's like, well, you know, we're not going to the meetings or anything. We want you guys to look like Grizzly Adams while we're camping. It'll be great. We've never seen any of you with beards. It's like, well, okay, yeah, that'd be fun. So they all start growing out their beards. But when we got home, we decided we wanted to stop off at this anointed brother's house, just see if he recognized any of them and to just play a little joke, with which the joke ended up causing 60% of the congregation to no longer be Jehovah's Witnesses, which ended up being epic in itself. So we stop off at his house, and all of the women and kids, we were all hiding behind the cars to see what was going to happen. And just the brothers went up to his front door, and they ring the doorbell, and he answers. And he doesn't necessarily recognize them at first. And they said, as a joke, well, we were just in your neighborhood preaching the good news of God's kingdom. Would you like a Watchtower and Awake magazine? And he just flips out. He falls for it because he's a gullible Jehovah's Witness. And he's like, are you literally preaching door to door looking like that? What are you doing? And they're like, no, we just came back from camping and going to Mount Rushmore. It's our Mount Rushmore Grizzly Adams beards, you know? And it's like, what? And he starts yelling at him, and he's like, it's because of brothers like you that have been the reason why we all have to shave, and Watchtower illustrated Jesus as beardless for 36 years, and why we thought 75 was going to be Armageddon. Don't you realize how detrimental that is, what you're doing? What are you, creature worshiping Grizzly Adams? I'll talk to you at the meeting. Just go home and shave those things off. You don't even realize what brothers like you have done to the organization over the years. And he's just furious. So my dad's all nervous, like, are we going to get disfellowship because we grew out our beards for, going camping? So the brother at the meeting, he pulls out, he takes them all into the back room, and he pulls out the 1974 yearbook. And there's one in particular paragraph that I want to share with you to start the whole thing off. The one petty thing that started it. This is like the craziest dots I've ever connected ever. So he starts to point out, and there was a situation between Joseph Rutherford, the president of Watchtower back in the day, and this one brother Balzerit. And there are also some other unnamed brothers that were also in the situation, but it happened at the branch in Germany. So this situation, the mid to late 1920s, because then they saw a need where they needed to buy a new rotary press. And so I'm going to read the paragraph. It says, but more equipment was needed. For that reason, Brother Balzerit asked Brother Rutherford for permission to buy a rotary press. Brother Rutherford saw the necessity and agreed, but on one condition. He had noticed that over the years, Brother Balzerit had grown a beard very similar to the one that had been worn by Brother Russell. His example soon caught on, for there were others who also wanted to look like Brother Russell. This could give rise to a tendency towards creature worship, and Brother Rutherford wanted to prevent this. So during his next visit, within hearing of all the Bible House family, he told Brother Balzerit that he could buy the rotary press, but only on the condition that he shave off his beard. Brother Balzerit sadly agreed and afterward went to the barber. During the next few days, there were several cases of mistaken identity and some funny situations because of the stranger who was sometimes not recognized by his fellow workers. So the brother is then comparing my dad and the rest of the brothers as being just like these men, that they were creature worshiping Russell and they're creature worshiping Grizzly Adams. But Rutherford was very touchy about the whole Russell situation because, Watchtower admits this, that 75% of the members left after 1914, and then in 1916, Charles Taze Russell died, and 75% of them left. And it was a small organization back then because they were all of the anointed. So there was less than 144,000 members, of course, because of that. A lot of them didn't necessarily like Joseph Rutherford. And so he's accusing them of creature worship, and Brother Balzerit shaved off his beard, but the other brothers did not. And so it was bothering him. And he couldn't hold a rotary press over the rest of their heads, and he was thinking they were going to follow suit, but they didn't. And so he's thinking of a way, well, how do I get all the rest of them to shave too? So what they were doing, the argument, because they had backbones back then, because they were all of the anointed. It wasn't like, well, I'm of the anointed and you're great crowd. No, they were all kind of seeing themselves as being equals. And what the argument that they would give, like I've heard a lot of you give, is that, well, I'm not imitating Russell, I'm imitating Jesus. And if Jesus had a beard, if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. So then Rutherford comes up with a way of how he can remove Jesus's beard. And it was, I believe, the Light Book Volume 2. And it was hot off the press. And this anointed brother is there at Bethel when this happens. And so Rutherford comes marching down to, the printery, and he pulls the book off of the printing press and he hands it to one of the brothers who had a beard. And he's like, turn to page 174. Go ahead. See the illustration that's in there. And he looks at it, and it's an angel. It's like, yeah, what about it? Is there something wrong or what? He's like, well, do you notice anything different about it? It's not just any angel, it's Jesus. Do you notice anything? It's like, I don't know. Like what? He's like, well, does he have a beard? No. He's like, exactly. And if Jesus doesn't have a beard, neither should you. And it's like, we can't just be illustrating him without a beard and just, arbitrarily saying that he doesn't. Do you have any proof? Do you have any evidence that he didn't have a beard? And then I will, I guess, but if you don't have any evidence to back it up, you can't just remove it and then just say that he doesn't have a beard. So Rutherford, he goes off in a huff and he goes to find some evidence, which they discuss thoroughly in the 8/15/1954 Watchtower, in the questions from readers. And of course, they have spoken about it in previous articles, but I wanted to pick one that is still on jw.org. So at this point, Jesus would have been illustrated as beardless for about 22 years. The question says, the traditional picture of Jesus shows him with long hair and beard, but the Watchtower publications illustrate him as beardless and with short hair. Which is correct? Good question. Which is correct? And it says, it admits. The later Watchtower publications show Jesus as beardless and with short hair because he is shown that way in representations of him that are older than the traditional effeminate-looking picture. Really? They're saying Jesus looks effeminate when he's depicted with long hair and a beard? It's like, interesting, but they admit that those later Watchtower publications do show Jesus as beardless and with short hair. So what are these representations of him that are older than this effeminate-looking picture? And it brings up 5 different pieces of evidence, which then in the next article I show you, oh my goodness, because they use that same evidence to argue the exact opposite viewpoint, which should, I hope, show Jehovah's Witnesses just how Watchtower manipulates scripture to make it point to anything that they want to. And then through that next article, you're going to see how they then thought that 75 was going to be Armageddon because of what they then did. When they say something that doesn't make sense on a human standpoint and they want you to do it, this was one of them. So the first piece of evidence is the chalice of Antioch. And it says, in an ancient beaker or cup found at Antioch, Syria, which purports to represent Jesus and his disciples at the memorial supper, Jesus is engraved thereon as a beardless young man, while some of his disciples are pictured with beards. For a photograph of this, see Harper's Bible Dictionary, page 22, the chalice of Antioch. So they do not show a picture of this chalice of Antioch. You have to go and hunt down the Harper's Bible Dictionary. Well, thanks to the internet, we can see this chalice, and this is it. Both sides of it, all the way around it. And this is supposedly depicting Jesus and his disciples at the memorial supper. They're saying that no, this chalice is one of the reasons of why they've been illustrating Jesus as beardless and why they think that it's true. This is evidence, ladies and gentlemen. So then they bring up the scholarly book by Jack Finnegan, that this is a scholarly book, and it's called Light from the Ancient Past. And it tells of 2nd century Christian paintings found in the catacomb of Priscilla in the room Capilla Graecia. And it states, the painting of the resurrection of Lazarus is almost effaced, but it is still possible to recognize that on one side is depicted a small building containing a mummy, and on the other the sister of Lazarus standing with arms upraised. In the middle, Christ is shown, facing towards the tomb and with the right hand uplifted in a gesture of speech. He is represented in the Roman type. Important to remember. He's represented in the Roman type and is dressed in tunic and pallium, the left hand holding the garment. He is youthful and beardless, with short hair and large eyes. The picture is of great interest since it is the oldest representation of Jesus that is preserved anywhere. It says page 371. So they also don't show a picture of this resurrection of Lazarus. Thanks to the internet, this is it. And he is indeed dressed just like a Roman. But I'm not even going to address it because, again, Watchtower is going to do that for me. But in this article, Watchtower is saying this is the second evidence that Jesus was indeed beardless. And not just beardless when he was a young man, because, common sense can understand that. But they were saying, and they depict him, that throughout his whole entire life, he was beardless. So then, it says, further on in this book, tells of a painting of the healing of the paralytic, found in the house church in an excavated ancient settlement of Dura in the Syrian desert. And it states, the almost destroyed painting of Christ in the catacomb of Priscilla at Rome probably belongs, as we have seen, to the middle of the 2nd century. The painting at Dura is dated even more definitely in the first part of the 3rd century. In both pictures, Christ is shown as a young and beardless man with short hair and wearing the ordinary costume of the day. These and similar portrayals are the earliest type of Christ as far as is now known in early Christian art. Later in the 3rd century, Christ appears still as youthful but with long curly hair, and from the 4th century on, the more familiar bearded type appears. And again, they don't show what the healing of the paralytic looks like. But this is it. Apparently, that figure in the middle was supposedly Jesus. According to Watchtower, they're saying, nope, that's a beardless Jesus, and that's our third evidence as to why we have also been illustrating him as beardless. But to me, it looks like a woman holding a baby. But hey, Watchtower is going to prove themselves wrong in just a moment. Then the fourth evidence. It says, as recently as October 7th, 1949, the new east window of the Stepney Parish Church, the mother church of East London, England, was unveiled by the Earl of Athlone. The photograph of this church window, as published in the Illustrated London News, October 1st, 1949, shows a cross with a young man nailed to it, beardless and with short hair, to represent Christ crucified but triumphant. Now, Watchtower is calling that the Mother Church of East London, because Watchtower also calls itself the Mother Organization. But this is a picture of the outside of that church. And if you see what the cover of the Watchtower used to look like as well, that church might be the church that they were depicting on the cover of the Watchtower, because they're seeing and calling this the Mother Church of East London. Is that the Watchtower that they're also using for the cover of the Watchtower? But this, I've even been to this church. I've seen it in person. This is the window of the church that they're talking about, this Christ crucified but triumphant. Oh my goodness. It looks like a Roman. Just how the catacomb of Priscilla and the healing of the paralytic, those were both depicted in Roman type garments too. Very interesting now, isn't it? Oh my goodness. Well, what about the Bible? What does Watchtower have to say about biblical evidence? This is the last paragraph of this Questions from Readers, till we get to the next one, which, oh my goodness. It says, since the Bible does not describe Jesus' facial appearance or indicate he had a beard of length, we follow the oldest archaeological evidence rather than the later traditional view that makes Jesus appear effeminate and sallow and sanctimonious. Oh, they're calling him effeminate again. And you know what it means when you call a man effeminate. You're calling him gay is what you're doing. They're calling Jesus gay when he is portrayed with a beard. But then they go so far as call him sallow and sanctimonious too. And they always like to use the term some. Like some people say, they say. So then they say some use Isaiah 50 verses 6 as proof that Jesus had a beard. I gave my back to the smiters and my cheeks to them that plucked off the hair. I hid not my face from shame and spitting. This may have been literally fulfilled in a typical way upon Isaiah, foreshadowing the shameful insults and reproaches to be heaped upon the servant class, the primary one whom is Jesus, because the anointed include themselves in that group. They're the servant class. And Jesus is just the primary one. It says each one of the servant class suffers reproaches, but not necessarily all of the ones here specified. The record shows Jesus was whipped, slapped, and spat on, but no mention is made of beard plucking. If it had happened, why would it not have been named along with the other abuses and insults? Well, what in the world is my cheeks to them that plucked off the hair then? I would say that that's mentioning it, but let's just say that Jesus did not have his beard plucked out. That does not mean he didn't have a beard to pluck. Just because, Jesus did not have his beard plucked off, it didn't mean he didn't have a beard to pluck. Like, they also didn't mention plucking his eyebrows, but that doesn't mean he didn't have eyebrows to pluck. For goodness sake. It's like, but they're saying, oh, no. That scripture only refers to Isaiah. It doesn't, because, they're also including themselves in with Jesus. Because like the previous videos I made about what the anointed say of how they also have to suffer the same as Christ did. That's what they're saying in this article too. That, they don't have their beards plucked out, and so if they don't, then Jesus didn't. It might have happened to Isaiah, but that doesn't mean anything. And then it mentions the Septuagint. It says, in fact, the Septuagint rendering of Isaiah 50 verses 6 does not mention the cheeks being plucked of hair, but as being slapped instead. I gave my back to scourges and my cheeks to blows, and I turned not away my face from the shame of spitting. The record in the gospel states that all this did literally happen to Jesus. Well, what do you mean? If the gospel record says that all this did literally happen, are they saying only in the Septuagint and not their own version of the New World Translation that mentions my cheeks to them that plucked off the hair? I don't quite understand. And so if they're saying that Jesus did not have his beard plucked out, then why are they depicting him on the torture stake with no beard? Because if he had no beard, that would mean that they do feel his beard was plucked out. But it's confusing. It doesn't make any sense. Their argument is faulty. But this is the 5 pieces of evidence, at least in this article, where they're saying, nope, Jesus did not have a beard. And that is why we're illustrating him that way. Because not only is he effeminate and sallow and sanctimonious, but we have evidence that he never had a beard. Never. And that's why we've been illustrating him that way. So then, 14 years go by. 14 more, for a total of 36 years. In the 5/1/1968 Watchtower, again, a questions from readers. And this is going to make everything very abundantly clear of exactly how Watchtower manipulates scripture. They twist it to be able to point to anything that they want to argue. They can even use the same exact scriptures and the same exact everything to point to two opposite conclusions. And I want you to ask yourself, if you're a witness, would you have ever come to that same conclusion of seeing that evidence? Would you have ever been convinced that Jesus didn't have a beard, so much so that you would 100% illustrate him without a beard and to argue it and debate it at the door? No, I would hope not. But there were witnesses back then. All of them back then backed it up. Every single one of them, because if they didn't, they would have been called an apostate. It's like, what do you mean you're not agreeing with the faithful and discreet slave? So then the 5/1/1968 Watchtower, questions from readers. It says, when Jesus was a man on earth, did he wear a beard? Biblical evidence is the most reliable testimony to be found on this question, and a recent careful review of what it says indicates that Jesus did indeed have a beard. Biblical evidence. They just got done saying that there was none. That the Bible, it says, since the Bible does not describe Jesus' facial appearance or indicate he had a beard of length, we follow the oldest archaeological evidence rather than the later traditional view. But now all of a sudden, biblical evidence is the most reliable testimony to be found, and that Jesus did indeed have a beard. Well, why didn't they carefully review this before? The reason why is because Rutherford was willing to do whatever it took to get people to do his bidding. And even if it took, 36 years to get you all in line to, all be shaving, he was willing to do it. And the sad part is that Rutherford died in 1942. And so Nathan Knorr is the one that wrote the article in 54 and is writing this one in 1968. Or it was Freddie Franz, who was vice president with Nathan Knorr. And every single one of those governing body members agreed with all of this. Also, what is ridiculous is that they had it right to begin with. So, here's the biblical evidence, and oh my goodness. And then we're going to get into, in this, you're going to see how they thought 75 was going to be Armageddon because of all this. It says, Jesus, born a Jew, came to be under law, and he fulfilled the law. This was in order that he might pave the way for the abolishing of the law and for release of the Jews from the curse of the law, the condemnation of death that it brought against them. Like all other Jews, Jesus was under obligation to keep the whole law. One of the commandments of the law was, you must not cut your side locks short around, and you must not destroy the extremity of your beard. That was a commandment of the law. God doubtless, it's doubtless, gave Israel this law because among some pagans it was practiced to cut the beard in a certain fashion in worship of their gods. Pagans cut their beard. Nevertheless, that law did not mean that a beard was not to be well kept, for in the Near East, a well-groomed beard was considered a symbol of dignity and respectability. During extreme grief, shame, or humiliation, one might pluck hairs from his beard or leave the beard or mustache untended. In several prophetic statements, this is important, when they mention prophecy and prophetic statements now, in several prophetic statements, the shaving off of the beard was used figuratively to illustrate great mourning because of calamity. Significantly, a prophecy concerning Jesus' suffering states, My back I gave to the strikers, and my cheeks to those plucking off the hair. Isaiah 50 verses 6. The very same scripture that they used, that they're like, well, some use Isaiah 50 verses 6 as, evidence that, or proof that Jesus did not have a beard. But, this may have been literally fulfilled in a typical way upon Isaiah, but, it doesn't mean that it happened to Jesus. And now all of a sudden, it's a significant prophecy concerning Jesus when they just got done 14 years prior, and who knows what all happened in between too, because they did even talk about it in between. I think it was 1964 they addressed it again, and they backed themselves up. It's like, are you kidding me? Now all of a sudden it's a biblical prophecy, and you're going to use that as proof that Jesus had a beard now, when before you used it as evidence that he did not? Now we're going to get into why did they think all of this could be the catalyst for 1975 being the War of Armageddon. It says, Hanun, the king of Ammon, grossly insulted the ambassadors kindly set by David by cutting off half of their beards. Because of their great humiliation, David told these men to dwell in Jericho until their beards grew abundantly. This act of Hanun was, of course, aimed at David as an insult and provoked war. Oh my goodness. It wasn't even done to David. It was done to the ambassadors that he sent in lieu of himself. Can you imagine what that would be to, if that was done to Jesus back in the day? If doing that to David's ambassadors was seen as an insult and it provoked war, well, what kind of a war would it provoke if you then did it to Jesus? But Watchtower then goes on and is very explicit and very thorough of exactly what kind of an insult this would be to Jesus. It's like, if they're thinking, well, maybe Jesus is reading this through the channel of communication, I don't know, because this article happened in 1968. And they started at this exact same time frame is when they started to hint that, well, 75 could be Armageddon. Yeah. Oh, yeah. When they start getting carried away that, 1975 could be Armageddon. It's like, well, what do you think would spur that on? And then they just used, 6,000 years of mankind's existence as to try and back themselves up. But originally, for almost 100 years, they had been saying that 1874 is when 6,000 years of mankind's existence took place. So that was not a date that they even really needed to address. And then they just said, oh, well, I think we were 100 years off in our calculations, and they started to point that was going to happen in 75 too, but it gets worse. Oh my goodness, just wait. So it says also, it was generally customary for men to wear beards, even before the law covenant was made. While the Hebrews did not make monuments with figures of themselves, many monuments and inscriptions have been found in Egypt and Mesopotamia and other Near Eastern lands in which Assyrians, Babylonians, and Canaanites are pictured with beards, and some representations dated as far back as the 3rd millennium BCE show beards of varying styles. Among the above-named peoples, eunuchs were the only ones depicted as beardless. Often boys were made eunuchs so that later they could be used to care for the king's harem. I want you to look up what making a eunuch out of a man involved. They basically castrated them and made them like impotent or something so that they would not be any type of a threat to the king's harem. But eunuchs were the only ones depicted back in the day as being beardless. It says, this making eunuchs of men was not a practice in Israel. However, because the law excluded eunuchs from the congregation of Israel. Israel didn't even have eunuchs, and Jesus would have been seen as a eunuch where he was not even included in the congregation. And they say, oh, well, Jesus is the head of the congregation. Not if you remove his beard, he's not. Because they're depicting him not in current times, they're depicting him in biblical times. And if he would have been seen that way in biblical times, he would not have been recognized as the Messiah either. It says, at the time Jesus was on earth, the Roman custom was beardlessness. Therefore, if Jesus had been beardless, he might have been challenged as either a eunuch or a Roman. Oh my goodness. Like seriously, you know, to anyone who's a Christian, this should completely upset you because it was seen as absolute insult, disrespect, having him be mistaken as a eunuch or a Roman. And if you know your Bible, it was the Roman emperor that sentenced Jesus to death, and it was the Roman soldiers that were the ones that killed him. They even were the ones that pierced him in the side. And he was going to be challenged as a eunuch or a Roman, but it gets worse. Oh my God, yeah, it gets worse. It says, men of ancient Semitic groups, as we have seen in our consideration of ancient monuments, wore beards, even prior to the time of the Mosaic Law. Since a beard grows naturally on most men, it is reasonable to conclude that their forefathers also wore beards. Consequently, it seems evident that Noah, Enoch, Seth, and Seth's father Adam were likewise bearded men. Now it's all of a sudden reasonable to conclude this, but the reason why they had to bring this up is because they were also portraying Noah, Enoch, Seth, and Adam as beardless during that 36-year time frame too. It's like, oh, well, now all of a sudden it's reasonable to conclude these things. Well, then I guess when they were concluding otherwise, that would be unreasonable? Yes, it would be unreasonable. And it gets worse. It's going to get worse and worse and worse, believe me, till the very end. It is appropriate, however, to give consideration to arguments advanced to the effect that Jesus was beardless. So now they are going to give consideration to their own faulty, untruthful argument that Jesus was beardless. Because no one else was arguing this fact except for Watchtower. It says this idea has been largely based on theories built up by certain archaeologists with regard to the so-called chalice of Antioch. Just how they addressed 1975 where they said, oh, well, some of you all jumped ahead. They had already used that argument where it's like, well, you know, those theories were built up by certain archaeologists. So they're experts at placing blame on other people. And it says this is a large silver beaker or cup within a silver framework shell of vines and figures of men, which you guys already saw. On one side of the cup is a boy with 5 men facing him, and on the other side a young, more mature man, beardless, with 5 others facing him. All appear to be seated. The cup, supposedly found by some natives in Antioch of Syria, was acclaimed as being of the second half of the 1st century CE, therefore the earliest pictorial representation of Christ. However, oh, I just love when there's a however, an analysis of the facts now makes it evident that the figures on the cup have been identified according to the imagination of the individuals interpreting them. Well, Watchtower was using their imagination to interpret it too. The boy is considered to be Jesus at the age of 12, and the other central figure is said to be Jesus, possibly after his resurrection, or again it may be John the Baptist. The other 10 figures have been interpreted variously to be 10 of the apostles, or the apostles and evangelists, or on one side the 4 evangelists with James, the son of Zebedee, and on the other side Peter, Saul, James, Jude, and Andrew. There are serious objections made by many archaeologists to these identifications. Really, it has been guesswork, and it is impossible to say what is represented by the figures. Some even doubt the authenticity of the cup, believing that it may be a forgery. Most, however, acknowledge it as an authentic discovery, but give it a much later date, from the 4th to the 6th century. So it is very doubtful that the cup is an early representation of Christ, if indeed it was intended to portray Christ at all. And the thing is, with this whole chalice of Antioch, back when they found it, they were thinking that it was somehow the Holy Grail. And so some people were debating, of who should be owning it and whatnot because of that. And then come to find out, it was more than likely a forgery, and it more than likely didn't even portray Christ at all. And it obviously wasn't the Last Supper. There was no supper going on there. It's a bunch of random guys sitting in thrones. So then it goes on. Oh my goodness. Bearing directly on the question is the fact that the early Christian writers, Justin Martyr, Origen, Clement of Alexandria, and others, clearly indicate that no satisfactory record of the physical likeness of Jesus and the apostles existed in their time. Augustine, writing about 400 CE, said that each man had his own idea of Christ's appearance, and the concepts were infinite. That's important to remember, that each man has his own idea of Christ's appearance, because Watchtower has their own idea as well. It says, evidence from the Roman catacombs has been adduced to bear on the subject. The catacomb of Priscilla now they're going to address. In catacombs thought by some to date from the 2nd century CE, which was also Watchtower, but by others as no earlier than the 3rd century, pictures have been found. The unusually extensive catacomb called the Catacomb of Priscilla contains wall pictures, one of which is thought to portray the resurrection of Lazarus. It is almost obliterated and is very difficult to make out. Really, no, I can hardly tell what it shows. But in the center there is a figure that has been taken to be Christ. Oh, it's been taken to be Christ, depicted as a young beardless man. But in the catacombs, apocryphal and false religious ideas are also plentiful represented. For example, in the Catacomb of Priscilla of about the same date is a scene of the apocryphal story of Susanna. A ceiling painting dated a little later contains a Madonna with child with a star above her head. In the crypts of Lucina, a ceiling painting dated as the middle of the 2nd century includes a little winged person known as Arodes or Amoretti, which on pagan tombs represented departed souls. Therefore, it has become evident to us that the catacomb representations of Jesus are seriously questionable as to authenticity. Well, we all knew that from the moment we saw those things. And it gets worse. It does. It is true that beginning with the 4th century, the majority of pictures show Christ and his apostles with beards, having emaciated, sad, weak, and effeminate monastic countenances, usually with a pagan nimbus or halo. Again, they just couldn't resist. They literally couldn't resist calling him effeminate. They already called him effeminate twice in the other article, sallow and sanctimonious. Now they call him emaciated, sad, weak, and effeminate monastic countenance. And they depicted him as something where he would have been mistaken as a eunuch or a Roman. He would have been challenged. Even David's representatives, King David's representatives, wouldn't even show their faces because part of their beards were removed. Oh my goodness. Like, I don't even know what to say. So then it continues on. It says, these are surely no true representations of the man Jesus Christ, of whom Pontius Pilate said, look, the man. Or of him who overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple and drove their cattle out. Neither of the apostles who vigorously preached God's word until it spread over all the Roman Empire. So they're saying, oh, no, he still doesn't look like that. Even after they just got done saying that, the idea of Christ and their ideas of him could be infinite, and that it's really only according to a man's imagination or his idea of what he looks like, then they're doing the same exact thing according to their imagination. It's like, no, these were strong, active, and happy men, servants of the happy God Jehovah. The dreary religious pictures are products of the apostasy, which by the 4th century was in full bloom. Pagan Emperor Constantine making a fusion of apostate Christianity with pagan religion, the state religion. Well, what did Watchtower just get done doing? They mixed pagan Christianity with their version of Christianity. They just got done admitting that they were believing apocryphal pictures in the Catacomb of Priscilla and doing the same exact thing that Constantine did by removing his beard. But they're like, nope. They're having their own idea. It's like, well, Jesus also cried tears of blood and fasted for 40 days. And he battled with Satan, tempting him to jump off of a building. And, he's climbing up mountains and preaching and walking with sandals. And he only had one change of clothes. How in the world do you think he went every 6 to 8 weeks and got his hair cut? It's like, oh, make sure the hair on my neck's getting long, and I've got to be clean shaven and all these various different things. Don't you think that maybe he was emaciated after fasting for 40 days and crying tears of blood, and then he was eventually killed? So give me a break. But no, they want Jesus to be buff with a 6-pack, and I don't even know what to say. So then it says, nevertheless, as already shown, it is apparent that Jesus did wear a beard, and so artistic representations of him in future Watchtower publications will harmonize with the scriptural evidence to that effect. So they admit that their artistic representations of Jesus were not in harmony with scriptural evidence, which means that they would be unharmonious, not in harmony, and pagan. So then the last 2 paragraphs really sum it up very neatly of exactly what types of people Jehovah's Witnesses are. It says, doubtless the early Christians followed the custom of the time and locality in which they lived with regard to the wearing of a beard. The Roman custom was beardlessness. Romans converted to Christianity would very likely continue in the Roman custom, while converts from the Jewish community would continue in the Jewish custom of wearing a beard. So all of you Jehovah's Witnesses who religiously shave before every meeting, you're continuing on in the Roman custom. And the anointed who do it too, but they're supposedly the spiritual Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, spiritual Jews. Isn't that what you say about yourselves, that you're spiritual Jews? You're not Roman converts, are you? So which is it? Really? It says, today Christian ministers, like the early Christians, are concerned with neatness and cleanness, but they strive to dress inconspicuously so that their appearance does not in any way detract from the dignity or effectiveness of the message they bear. In recent years, in many lands, a beard or long hair on a man attracts immediate notice and may, in the minds of the majority, classify such a person undesirably with extremists or as rebels against society. Well, you've been already labeled as extremists in Russia, and you were all clean shaven with short hair. So why did that happen? It had nothing to do with your physical appearance. You still got labeled as an extremist. It says God's ministers want to avoid making any impression that would take attention away from their ministry or hinder anyone from listening to the truth. What truth would that be? The truth that Jesus did not have a beard? Because that was the truth up until this very moment. They know that people are watching true Christians very critically, and that to a great extent they judge the entire congregation and the good news by the minister's appearance as a representative of the congregation. No, we're the ones that are all saying it's fine if you want to wear a beard. We don't care what you look like. You're the ones who care what you look like, and you're the ones who judge other people. It's like, oh, look at him. He's not all clean shaven and his hair's all long. He's worldly. Oh, they deserve to die at Armageddon. They're an apostate. Look at how they're dressed. Look at how they act. You're the ones that point fingers at other people. And just in the first part of that paragraph, you're worried about how you appear to other people. No one else cares but you, because you're the ones that judge other people. It says, in paradise restored on earth, it would not be out of order if men returned to wearing beards in perfect fashion like Adam in Eden. So you're just going to be in perfect fashion when paradise comes around? Then it's going to be fine for you to wear a beard? Why wouldn't it be fine now? And what do you harp on all the time about not being in fashion, and Toni Morris ripping everybody apart about wearing pants that are, too tight? You know what they say about those fashion designers? Oh, you know what Toni Morris says about that? But no, you're going to be in perfect fashion when paradise comes around. But here's the thing. People say this, I say this myself about Jehovah's Witnesses. They aren't really Christian, because any of them that would be fine with any of this happening and taking place, if that doesn't bother you, then you really aren't a Christian. Like, seriously. And the thing is, Watchtower got done calling Jesus effeminate 3 times. And in reality, I've never been in one place that has so many effeminate men around me as when I'm at the Kingdom Hall. Like, seriously, I've never met a larger group of effeminate men in my entire life. You're sallow and sanctimonious and self-righteous and sad and weak and monastic countenances. All of you, every single one of you Jehovah's Witness men act like that. Now, how does that make you feel, me saying that? If I walked around saying that, well, you certainly look effeminate there, brother, you would be offended by me saying that, wouldn't you? Then how do you think Jesus would feel? Because what if he really does look like that? And either which way, it doesn't matter. You're judging based upon appearance, judging even Jesus Christ's appearance. If he really did look like that, would you be like, ugh, I don't want to follow him. Look at him. He's looking all effeminate and stuff. I don't know. I think Jesus is gay. Is that the way you would be? Oh, look at the way he's acting. I think he's worldly. You would drag him into the back room and disfellowship him. You would disfellowship Jesus if you got a chance, if you saw, the things that they mention about him. And if he went into the kingdom hall and flipped the tables, you would say, your invitation has been revoked. Because that's literally how you would treat him, because that's how you treat all of us when we get upset about various things like this. It's like, I don't know why they're so upset. That's why. But I guess if you're really not a Christian and it doesn't bother you, but a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are atheists, and it upsets them. If it even upsets an atheist, then what in the world? Why wouldn't it upset a Jehovah's Witness? And in the end, no matter how it began, Watchtower grossly insulted Jesus Christ, so much so that they mentioned that it provoked war with King David. So what type of a war would it provoke with Jesus? Would it provoke the war of Armageddon? It obviously didn't. But those men, like Nathan Knorr and Freddie Franz, that's how they think. It's like, oh, because of our actions, that could cause the war of Armageddon. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, they start to hint at it without letting all of you know that you were culpable in the whole thing. And so be glad the war of Armageddon didn't happen, because if it would have, Jesus' wrath would have come down upon all of you instead, because you would have been the ones that provoked it. But of course, that's just the imaginations of those men in the Watchtower. We all know that those sorts of things are not sensible. They don't make sense on a human standpoint, you know what I mean? To think that, if we remove Jesus' beard, that could provoke the war of Armageddon. No, that doesn't make sense on a human standpoint. But of course, they have told you that when they do things like that don't make sense, that you're supposed to follow without question. And you do every time. And you don't even ask any questions about, well, why? Why in the world are you thinking this? It's like, oh yeah, you know what? He's right. 75 could be Armageddon. And you didn't even ask him, well, why do you believe that? Like, exactly why? What do you mean? You didn't even ask Freddie Franz, well, why do you believe 75 is going to be Armageddon? You did. You jumped ahead and you believed him without question, and you didn't even know all of his intentions and the reason behind why he was saying all of that. But I'll put links to these in the video description, and if you want to print them out and just hand them to your Jehovah's Witness family and be like, what's the deal with this? And I ask any Jehovah's Witness, I dare you, go back between 1932 and 1968 and try and find a picture of Jesus with a beard. You won't be able to. Even Adam and Noah and Seth and Enoch or whoever. Absolutely ridiculous. And it all started with something so petty as creature worshiping Charles Taze Russell. And then to get you all to comply and to shave, they go ahead and they find some, pathetic, faulty, false evidence to try and prove that even Jesus didn't have a beard, so that if you wanted to imitate Jesus, you couldn't. Instead, you're imitating a eunuch and you're imitating a Roman. So I guess since you are just imitating a bunch of eunuchs, no wonder you act the way that you do. I mean, like literally. And if that offends you, I'm sorry, but that's what Watchtower did to Jesus. And if it's okay for Watchtower to say that about Jesus, then it's okay for me to say it about you, because that apparently is the truth according to Watchtower from that time frame. So I'm just saying the truth. This upsets me to such a degree. And so I hope this was helpful, because I think single-handedly this is something that's like, hey, really, how in the world could you follow a group of men that would ever come to that conclusion? But, there are a lot of other doctrines that are all connected to this, because one thing leads to another. These men are supposedly of the anointed and Jesus Christ's brothers and the 12 tribes of Israel, and they don't know what the Bible has to say regarding these things. Then you really need to, think twice as to whether or not you want to follow them, because what else have they gotten horribly, horribly wrong? Do you want to be constantly led astray? But Jehovah's Witnesses, like, oh, well, they're imperfect and they make mistakes. Well, if you were not to believe this during that time, you would have been labeled as an apostate and disfellowshipped without question. And if you don't mind being forced to follow that sort of thing, I guess, well, you're really not Christian. So the next time you see, a Jehovah's Witness, when you see an elder, say, well, are you a Roman or are you a eunuch? Like, you don't have any facial hair. Boy, you look effeminate. I don't know. Just awful. So it's just awful. But I have a feeling, Jehovah's Witnesses are just going to excuse it away, because that's what they always do. When something is of great humiliation, they're going to pack up their cart and they're going to go hide their face. It's like, oh no, because they can't handle the truth. They can't handle being shown what they've done. But to anyone who actually has a backbone and cares about these things, maybe you'll actually make a stand for the actual truth. But usually what witnesses do is they just like, well, that happened before my time. And so as long as it happened when you weren't there, then it's perfectly okay. But this is so awful. I mean, you already know. You guys already understand. And so I want to give an extra special shout out to my father. If it was not for you growing that Mount Rushmore Grizzly Adams beard, and for the other brothers too, I wouldn't have known some of these details. And especially to that anointed brother for just flipping out and sharing the whole story. My goodness, it was just amazing. And I'm sure all of the other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses listening appreciate it as well. So be sure and click the subscribe button so that you're notified of future videos coming up, because I've got some more heavy-hitting topics and things to expose, some personal stories and things like what I just shared. And I've also got some more amazing interviews by some courageous ex-Jehovah's Witnesses sharing their experiences and stories. So thank you so much for listening, and thanks, Dad. We all really appreciate it. And I'll talk to you later. Have a good one. Bye-bye.